ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Have a holly jolly Christmas. It's the best time of the year. I don't know if there'll be snow, but have a cup of cheer.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Let me let you behind the scenes a little bit in terms of my creative process and how the material for this show gets put together. Every week, I will go through, especially on the weekend when I have a little bit more time and I get up a little bit earlier, I will go through hard copies of all the newspapers, and I'll cut out the articles that I have an interest in talking about. And if it's somebody that's written an op-ed or a column or something that I find interesting, I'll kind of highlight their name as somebody to reach out to in the future. Then, during the week, with the 900 newsletters that are in my email inbox every day, I'll do the same thing. I'll copy and paste an article that is of interest to me. Very interesting thing happened over the course of the last week or two. I cut out two articles in the same manner, and they're on two totally different subjects. The only thing they had in common, or so I thought, was that they were both of interest to me. Little did I know, the other thing they had in common was that they were both written by the same guy, a gifted storyteller who we've been privileged to talk to on the show before and who's agreed to rejoin us once more. I am very, very pleased to welcome Peter Funt, actor, host, producer, the son of Allen Funt, the creator of Candid Camera, and the author of several books, including the most recent one, Inside Fantasy Football, Inside America's Favorite Non-Contact Sport. Peter Funt, thanks so much for joining me on the radio again.
Wow, Frank, it's nice to talk to you again. And that's a heck of an intro. Thank you very much.
Well, if you're going to stay up until this time of the morning, we got to make it worth your while. Now, I alluded to your father, Allen Funt, and we've talked a little bit about him and Candid Camera previously. He created Candid Camera, which obviously remains iconic for its humor, its ability to capture authentic human moments. How do you think his influence has shaped your approach to storytelling, both in your book, your articles, and whatever other form you tell stories in?
Oh, well, of course, the thing he was most influential in regarding my life was that I continued to do Candid Camera after he retired. And the truth is, we're working right now on a brand new version of Candid Camera that we hope will start maybe the end of 2025. So, it's a great idea that keeps coming back around. That was his greatest contribution for all of us, and certainly for me and my family. As to the other part of my own career, which is journalism, I started at ABC Radio and I worked at WABC in New York in the news department early in my career. So my dad wasn't particularly influential in what I was doing in that respect, but he instilled in me a curiosity about people. And really, at the heart of all the stories I find myself reporting on and trying to examine in print or in books, whatever, it's that very thing, the curiosity about human nature, what makes people tick. And I think I got that from my dad.
That's great. And when that new version of Candid Camera does come out, you got to keep us posted on that, because that sounds like a lot of fun and certainly something I'm looking forward to seeing. I was a little surprised that the focus of your most recent book is fantasy football, but I was fascinated by it because I have noticed, and I took particularly note over the Thanksgiving holiday when I was at my wife's family on Thursday, and then I was at my family on Friday, and everybody, and I'm talking people between the ages of 13 and 70, are all checking what players and what plays are going to be good for this fantasy team, including my sister, who I didn't even know watched football, and yet she's obsessed with this fantasy team. What sparked your interest in covering this cultural phenomenon of fantasy football?
Well, I play fantasy football, and I've gotten increasingly, I don't want to use the word addicted. I think I've gotten increasingly devoted to following my team and playing the different forms that fantasy football now takes. And, of course, they say that the easiest thing to write about is something that you're familiar with. So I thought, well, this is natural. But I'll tell you really why I wrote this book, Frank. There were so many books out there already, books, magazines, podcasts, YouTube channels, you name it, that attempted to tell you tricks for winning, tips for winning, how to succeed at fantasy football. But as hard as I looked, I couldn't find anything in media that told the story of fantasy football. How the heck did this begin? How did it change over the years? What's the influence of gambling on fantasy football? Who are the big winners and what are their stories? Who are some of the celebrities who do fantasy football, et cetera, et cetera? In other words, the point of my book was, here's everything you might want to know about fantasy football except how to win. Because, frankly, when I figured that out, I ain't writing a book. I'm heading right to a casino.
Duly noted. 25, 26 years ago, I used to play fantasy baseball, and it was fun. I stopped playing because I didn't like rooting against the team that I was rooting for in real life because of the having a vested interest in how certain players were doing. But even at fantasy baseball at its height, never had the kind of devoted following that fantasy football seems to. What do you attribute that to? Why did fantasy football take off to a level that I've never seen any fantasy sport take off?
Well, first of all, fantasy baseball is really tough and demanding. I mean, think of how many games are played each year in the MLB. So that alone makes it really tough. You've got to be very devoted to play fantasy baseball. Football, we know there's a limited number of games. The teams only play once a week, and so it's more manageable. But what's really changed is that the companies who run the fantasy football platforms, I'm talking about ESPN, Yahoo, Underdog, Sleeper, etc., those companies working with the NFL, working with the TV networks, and working with advertisers have really put together so many fascinating formats for fantasy. It's not just the old redraft leagues that we all did, with a bunch of guys who are friends at work or in the neighborhood. And it's much more exotic than that now. And there's something in there for a lot of people. Don't forget, in what they call daily fantasy football, DFS, the prizes go into the millions of dollars. So this is big stuff, and that also attracts an awful lot of people. And then there's the popularity of the new spin on the game, or fairly recent spin on the game, which is the leagues that Underdog runs that go year-round. So you can start drafting in January for games that won't be played until September. And this year-round stuff has kept people connected to fantasy football in a way that they never were before. And you put it all together, it's just one tremendous enterprise. The NFL loves it, Frank, because thanks to fantasy football, you've got people like me and perhaps you or the people at your Thanksgiving table who are watching lousy games sometimes.
Absolutely.
Who are rooting for teams they never would have thought to even pay attention to, simply because they might have one player on their fantasy roster who's on that team. Well, nothing could be better for the NFL and for TV networks and sponsors. It drives up viewership. It keeps people in front of the TV, and everybody's winning. At least most people are. Not me this year. It's kind of a very challenging year in fantasy football because fantasy has as many ups and downs as the NFL itself. And with so many players getting hurt and stuff, boy, it's a topsy-turvy season, but it's a lot of fun.
At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is the one and only Peter Funt. Peter, I want to touch upon your recent Wall Street Journal column on falls and what you've had to say about true crime. But just one last thought on the fantasy football. In your book, you highlight how women are the fastest growing audience for fantasy football. And I saw this with my sister Claudia, who, again, I would describe at best as a average or below average sports fan in terms of enthusiasm. What do you think is driving this trend, meaning the trend among women participating, and how's that reshaping the industry?
I interviewed a lot of women who are involved in fantasy football, including one delightful woman in Illinois who's the only woman to ever have won $1 million prize in DraftKings Daily Fantasy. And the folks who care to buy my book and read about her, she's really got a great story. Too long to tell right now, but it's very interesting. The point is, most of these women I spoke with, not just $1 million winners, but you know, people who just play for fun or for small change, claim that they were always interested in it or were for a long time, but that the guys didn't take them seriously, and at work there was a league, but they didn't want women. And I kept hearing the same thing. And gradually, women have been allowed in to the big inner circle that men seem to control when it came to fantasy sports, and the evolution of the online accessibility and on your phone and all, and daily, where you're not really playing against your small group of people, but you could be playing against thousands of anonymous people. Well, now anybody can enter. So it makes it a lot easier and more accessible for women. And, of course, one thing leads to another. The more women that become involved, then even more women become involved because they go on social media. They have Facebook groups, et cetera, and it spreads. And it's growing now. As you said, it's the biggest segment of growth for NFL football. I suppose that's not surprising. If men had such a head start, then if a lot of women take part, they would be the fastest growing group right now. But it is kind of amazing. It's up to about 25%. 25% of all fantasy football participants, 1 out of 4, are women. And I would not have guessed that.
No, neither would I. That was wild. Hey, I don't play fantasy football. I am in this football pool where we can win a small prize each week. I understand that you're not going to give anybody tips on how to win fantasy football. Do you have any guarantees for who's going to win any of the games this week that I can take advantage of?
Boy, what a great question. Check back with me on Tuesday, Frank. I'll tell you what happened.
Fair enough. I get it. The NFL, though, and the media companies, they've embraced fantasy football wholeheartedly. Has that relationship changed over the years, or were they always sort of encouraging fantasy football, knowing that it would lead to people to watch, the Giants versus the Panthers?
Fascinating story, because fantasy football was invented in the early 1960s by some guys in Oakland who were connected to what then was the brand new Oakland Raiders team. And there's a whole chapter in my book about this league and how it got started. But briefly, their purpose in starting fantasy football was to promote the NFL, not just the Raiders, but also the whole NFL. So the answer to your question at the beginning of the history is, yeah, fantasy football was something the NFL loved, and these guys were doing it. But very soon thereafter, and for many decades to follow, the NFL decided they hated fantasy football. They, through the later 60s, 1970s, 1980s, the NFL was completely opposed to it. They thought it was too closely related to sports gambling. They wanted no part of it. And it was a very, very tense relationship. But when fantasy sports were made legal in state after state, and then in 2018, when sports gambling was made legal outside of Nevada and Atlantic City for the whole nation, or at least those states that wanted to participate, well, the NFL turned on a dime. They thought, okay, let's jump in. This is a good thing. And you'd have to be an idiot to not recognize the cozy relationship that exists today between all the professional sports leagues and gambling and fantasy. My goodness, the ads for DraftKings and FanDuel are all plastered all over the place. You can't watch a game without seeing the commercials for those companies. A few stadiums actually have casinos now, sports books, I guess is the better term, in the stadium itself or the arena. I mean, the relationship is getting really cozy, and that's a kind way to describe it. I find it a little scary, actually, because I think there should be a church and state relationship there. I'm all for fantasy sports. I have nothing against sports gambling, but I don't like the idea of the leagues being too close to this stuff. I think it's asking for trouble.
Home means something different to everyone. But with Rocket Mortgage, home can mean even more. It can mean a college education, taming your high-interest debt, even a renovation. We've made it easier than ever to use your home equity. That home you worked so hard for, now it can work hard for you. Call 800-4ROCKET or visit rocket.com to find out more.
Rocket Mortgage, LLC, licensed in all 50 states. NMLSConsumerAccess.org, number 3030.
The number one selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
This episode is brought to you by Factor. Optimize your nutrition this year with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal service. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from 40 weekly options across 8 dietary preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Eat smarter at factormeals.com/listen50 and use code listen50 for 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Factormeals.com/listen50. Code listen50. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
If you're just tuning in, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. My guest is Peter Funt. Peter, before we run out of time, I want to talk to you about the issues that I invited you on the program to address. You had a great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal on the epidemic of falls among older Americans. Now, I've talked about this a great deal on the radio, and I have a very good friend who just took quite a tumble at 86 years old and fractured several vertebrae in his neck, and he's kind of immobile at the moment. He's having a very tough time, and so is his family. But your article highlights a complex set of risk factors. What surprised you most in researching this issue, the issue of falls?
Well, I'll tell you how I got started writing this, Frank, because I do cover a wide range of topics. You've sort of confirmed that in your introduction. But this caught my attention because, frankly, a guy in my office at the Candid Camera show, his mother fell last summer and was alone and fell in her bedroom and stayed on the floor because she couldn't get up for roughly 16 hours before the son, the guy I work with, came over for a visit and found her in that position. And she was rushed to the hospital and she was okay. And she was a senior woman in her early 70s. She got home from the hospital. Things seemed to be fine. But a few weeks ago, early November, she fell again at home. The big difference was that the second time she was wearing one of those medical alert devices. And they're so sophisticated now that the device sensed her falling. She didn't even have to push a button or anything. It sensed the fall. It triggered a connection to a dispatcher. The dispatcher's voice came on immediately from a speaker, addressed the woman by her first name, which is very comforting, asked, about the problem, called an ambulance. They got there. And, this possibly saved her life. It certainly saved her 16 hours on the floor. It turned 16 hours into 16 minutes for help to arrive. So I was kind of interested in that. I thought, if this is happening to a woman I know, I wonder how many people are facing these sort of problems. And I was thinking about writing it in the Wall Street Journal. And then Jay Leno fell down a hill in Pittsburgh, near Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. And I don't know if you saw the pictures of Jay, but he got really, really messed up. Black eye and his face all swollen. He broke his wrist. Fortunately, nothing more serious than that. But I thought, my goodness, here's 74-year-old Jay Leno, still very active, performing practically every night, and yet he's taking this terrible fall. There is an article here, so I wrote about it. And the more I looked into it, the more frightening it became, because it turns out that 1 out of every 4 people over age 65 have a fall each year that is serious enough to be reported in some way to keep track of. That's a lot of people. And then it gets worse because there are 3.6 million emergency room visits resulting from these falls. and horribly 41,000 deaths every year from these falls. And the medical cost for this stuff, over $80 billion a year. Now, it can't all be avoided or prevented. We all know that as folks get older, they're in greater risk of having almost any kind of accident, and they might be frailer later in life, and so they might suffer more serious consequences from a fall. You're never going to prevent all of that. But it turns out there are a lot of things that can be done, starting with just awareness among the older folks that, you gotta look at things. You gotta check your vision. You gotta check the medications, prescription drugs, but even over-the-counter drugs like antihistamines that you take for good purpose can make you more likely to fall due to the way your body reacts to those drugs. The shoes that you wear, do they fit properly? The list just goes on, and it turns out that the experts tell me anyway that a lot of senior citizens don't really want to pay enough attention to this stuff because they feel it's sort of admitting their own frailty, that they're embarrassed, and that should be the last thing on their mind. You'll live longer, you'll live healthier, and you'll save a lot of money if you take better care of yourself when it comes to fall prevention. Now, there's a woman in West Virginia, a U.S. Congresswoman named Carol Miller. She introduced a very nice bill this year, which simply says, if the bill is ever passed into law, that annual screening for fall risks for senior citizens would be covered by Medicaid, Medicare, and part of your annual checkup that Medicare covers. Now, for some reason, that bill, which sounds like a no-brainer to me, is stalled in Congress, but she hopes maybe early next year it'll get passed. That alone would be very helpful because then people would get checked out and doctors know what to look for. In fact, among the things that doctors do in that sort of checkup is very interesting. They have the person sit in a chair and then on command say, get up, walk 10 feet, turn around, walk 10 feet back, and sit down. And they've figured out that if that takes you more than 12 seconds to do, you're at risk for a fall. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting. And, regular guests that used to come on this program all the time, former Senator Joe Lieberman, ended up losing his life as a result of complications from a fall, which is just awful because he was still doing a lot of important work and was still as sharp as can be. And, my friend who just took a tumble at 86, very accomplished guy, an attorney and a guy as sharp as a tack. It's, again, horrible to see a fellow like that immobilized. But that statistic that falls among seniors result in $80 billion in costs annually is just staggering. I mean, think about what our economy, what the healthcare system, what the government could do with $80 billion. Aside from policy changes like that Medicare situation, coverage policy that you mentioned, what steps do you think society should take to better address this issue?
Well, I don't know that it's up to society so much as it is to the individuals. I mean, you want to, if you're older and if you have, especially if you have some, I won't even call it disability, just, maybe some arthritis in your knees or anything that makes it a little bit more difficult to get around, you want to have your house checked. And if you can afford it, by a professional who can tell you, these area rugs are dangerous, or you need some grab rails in your hallway, or certainly on the stairs, in the bathroom where accidents and falls frequently happen. So there's all sorts of stuff like that. If you can afford it, you really want to get one of those medical alert devices. There's a lot of companies that compete to sell this now. You know, that is a $4 billion industry in the U.S., and but the things work really well now. So that can be a lifesaver if you can afford it. Some people, senior citizens, don't want to wear the thing because they feel, again, it's a badge of weakness. It doesn't have to be that. In fact, the woman I interviewed wears the thing under her blouse or sweater or whatever. You don't even know she's got it on. So to me, that's just common sense. If you can afford that, it can be $40-$50 a month for that service, but I think it's well worth it if you can afford it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, my Aunt Camille has the same thing, and it's very, very, very nondescript. You had another interesting piece about America's obsession with true crime. I've certainly noticed this as well. It's true in podcasts, true in radio segments, true in books, films. Why are we so obsessed with true crime, in your opinion? What does it say about the American psyche that we're so interested in crimes and of very horrible things that have happened to perfect strangers?
I guess it's human nature. The question then is, why is our nature in this country any different than the rest of the world? And why are we more interested, perhaps, than we used to be? And I'm not sure I have or found the answer to that, Frank. You know, people like they like reality. That's why in the U.S. we have what some people accuse my father of inventing, which is reality TV. Mm-hmm. I suppose he did, but nowadays it takes so many different forms, and a lot of the programming that we enjoy now on streaming channels and limited series and so forth on pay cable are these so-called true crime dramas or dramatizations. People like it because they think it's real. So many of them are bastardized and depart from what might have been a kernel of truth in the original story. That is really kind of laughable in a way, that the appeal is the truthfulness of it, but the reality is that it's not all that true. But it seems to work. You know, American media goes in cycles. One successful thing. In fact, I'm reminding myself of a line, and I think it was the late comedian Fred Allen who first said, let's see, imitation is the sincerest form of television. That's what he said.
I love it.
And you know, that's really what we have going here. You have one successful series leads to 10 others, and 10 successful series gives you 100. And and media feeds on it as well. You know, I don't care which cable news network you watch. You know, we've got basically 3 big ones in this country, and they all, politics aside, they all snap to attention when there's some true crime to deal with, like currently the shooting death of this
United CEO.
Yeah. Well, I mean, take note of how many hours of cable TV are being given to this, because true crime sells.
It does indeed. Peter, I'm sorry, I'm out of time. We're going to have to end it there. You got to come back soon, because there's a lot of other subjects that you've written about with some authority, and I'd love to continue the conversation soon.
Well, the key word was some authority, Frank, but I try my best. It's great to talk to you, and I hope to come back soon.
Count on it.
Take care.
Peter Funt, you can check out this Wall Street Journal piece on falls on my Facebook page. I just linked to it, facebook.com/Morano fan. If you want to comment, you could certainly do so at 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.